That's in Huang from NVIDIA like recently said something about this, like to truly succeed and become great, you need to build resilience, and to build resilience, you need to suffer. And I think if you can see how people work in times when it requires a lot of resilience, that's probably one of the strongest signals you can have to how they're going to fare as a founder, I think.
There's for some people, they might have like 50 followers on Twitter, not to make this about followers, but just like not a lot of people necessarily know them on the internet. But if you talk to people they've worked with, they have a great reputation. And then there are people on the internet with a ton of followers and a ton of reputation and a ton of clout. And a lot of people don't respect them behind closed doors. And so I think ideally that delta is very small, but it often can exist in some of the biggest names on tech Twitter, for instance.
I mean, all decisions I've made in the past with regards to like staying at a company through the highs and lows were, I would say, primarily like driven by that aspect of things, like a deep care for like everyone who I work with and everyone who I'm working for, like in terms of customers, right?
If you've been through hard things in your life, you at least like build some kind of a barometer for it. Like, and so you do build skills for going through it, whether the thing you're going through is like the hardest thing or not. And actually kind of the nice thing is like, you don't know when you're going through it if it's the hardest thing, but if you've already been through hard things, you know you can handle a hard thing and you have skills for going through that.
Julian, the co-founder and current CEO of OnDeck, told me that he loved forum episodes where I aim to bring the people who are the best at what they do and I bring them together. He told me that he would love for me to tell everyone about OnDeck, and frankly, it's one of the greatest things ever made in my opinion. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned entrepreneur, or anywhere in between, OnDeck offers mentorship, resources, and a very large community which can help in supporting your journey. They also have something which is known as the OnDeck Fellowship, which is a 1 week in-person sprint in San Francisco, which is designed to help you figure out the company that you want to build and with the best person possible for you. And after that 1 week sprint is done, they onboard you into a network of more than 2,000 founders, and which is a very large number. It combines community, software, events, and a lot of different things which can help you in generating early momentum for your product and raise money in order to build it. To check out OnDeck, visit beondeck.com. That is beondeck.com. Enjoy.
So, hey guys, I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. You too.
Doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I've been eyeing this for a very long time, and I'm so glad we got the chance to do this. But before we get into a ton of stuff that we have planned out, let's start with intros. We'll go alphabetically. So Andrew, then Steven.
Huge. So I guess that means I'm kicking off. Yeah, I'm Andrew Ray. I am the co-founder of a company that is not yet announced, but we're building software in the tax and compliance world. So very, very fun financial services type stuff. I pretty much spent my entire career doing early stage tech stuff. So I started a company when I was about 20. Very, very small exit from that business that mostly didn't work, but that got me into doing startups, and I've kind of been in and out of that ever since. So I was in venture for a bit, and then most recently I worked at a couple of different venture-backed companies, one of which I worked with Steven at, a company called OnDeck, raised a bunch of money during COVID, and did the whole scaling journey until it wasn't scaling anymore. But got the chance to work with Steven there, and then ultimately led me to a different company called Capital, and then eventually ended up starting this company thereafter. The company is called TaxMar. I'll let Steven give his intro.
And just to quickly double click on OnDeck as well. I highly recommend checking it out if you're an early stage founder trying to figure out, or even just someone who's trying to figure out what's next. Julian was also on this podcast, and Julian is someone who I both worked with for years and respect a lot. So I would also say check that out. It's a really good podcast. Yeah, I'm the CTO and co-founder of said stealth startup that we're currently working on. Not sure how long it's going to be in stealth in the future, but probably not too much longer. I've been working in software for a bit over 10 years, starting from, weirdly enough, bioinformatics and academia, working my way through kind of like product engineering, like mobile and web dev stuff, taking a detour into some like AI ML stuff for my master's in college at Michigan, and a little big tech detour here. But then, yeah, for the past 5 years or so, I've been working in early stage stuff. Most recently at OnDeck, where I was head of engineering, and that's where I met Andrew.
Yeah, and I'll finally double click on one more thing. So just to double click on the Julian thing, since he was on this podcast. But yeah, no, Julian's amazing. Obviously, Stephen and I both worked with him, and he's also an angel investor in our company. And so nothing but great things to say about him. I think they do some really great work for founders, and highly recommend it if you're thinking about starting a company.
Julian, we talk about Julian. He's one of the best people I've ever seen. It's intentional when he does things. Not a lot of people are like that. And I mean, you guys worked with him for so long. How is it? How is that?
It was good. I mean, I worked with him a bit more closely towards the tail end of my time at OnDeck. And yeah, I mean, I think he just has a really good knack for understanding founders, just from like, I think originally from his like angel investing, as well as just like from later taking on the role as CEO of OnDeck. Yeah, I mean, I think he's a perfect person for the role. Like, he just has a deep intuition about like what founders need and what they want, and I think his taste will take him really far.
Julian is I think Julian is just probably one of the best people at providing not just like financial capital, which is commoditized to early stage companies, but belief capital. I think that's one of the best things he does. He is very good at finding people before they're obvious and then betting on them. And then helping them actually become a little bit more obvious to the market. I know of a lot of younger founders that he's invested in very early on before they were like known commodities in the venture scene, and made a lot of the introductions for them that helped them like go raise money for their companies. So I think Julian's just really good at seeing those people that may not be 100% obvious yet, but then he not only invests, sure, but he's really, really good at like believing in them and making them feel like he believes in them, and then introducing them to other people, being like, hey, like I think this person's like, I know they're not obvious, but they're worth talking to because they're doing something interesting. And I think that's what is part of what makes him such a great fit for taking over OnDeck and this like new chapter that they're in. So I think if there were like one thing I double click on, it's that thing of identifying people early and believing in them. I think it's underrated.
What do you think that he see in you guys?
We worked with Julian when like OnDeck was a rocket ship, one of the hottest companies in Silicon Valley, raising tons and tons of money, and we like the numbers were all up into the right. And then also like Stephen especially like worked with Julian when things were not so up into the right at OnDeck, and so and then Julian knew me like when I was at a different company, and like knew me through that process, and that company eventually like later selling. I think he had seen a lot of context of us, of like how we handle when things don't go our way, how we handle when like just how hard we work, what our peers think of us. Like when you're like, there's nowhere to hide in a startup, and so if you work with someone, that's like it's a pretty good tell on like how good they are or not. So I think in that context, it was very easy for me to want to work with Stephen again, for instance, in the context of this company, because I've worked with Stephen before. I've observed Stephen. So I think similar with Julian, like he kind of got to cheat on that one because he got to work with us. So it's hopefully from his point of view a pretty easy angel check to write.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to that too, I mean, I can't speak at all for Julian and like his thoughts on investing in us, but like if I were to invest in, let's say, like a past teammate from OnDeck, yeah, I think I mean, OnDeck had this phase where we were expanding into a lot of different areas, and later decided that like we just wanted to focus on making the one ODF, like OnDeck founders experience, really great. And so like necessarily like shedding all of the other projects that were going on involved a lot of pain. And I really think that when you get to see how people work through that process, it's way more revealing than like seeing how they work when things are going well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Jensen Huang from NVIDIA like recently said something about this, like to truly succeed and become great, you need to build resilience, and to build resilience, you need to suffer. And I think if you can see how people work in times when it requires a lot of resilience, that's probably one of the strongest signals you can have to how they're going to fare as a founder, I think. when shit is constantly breaking all the time. I think a lot of the Stanford students were not expecting him to say that.
Right. But like you talked about Stephen, like we talked about if he were to invest in a fellow on deck colleague or a person we worked with in the past, what role, in your opinion, does that same organization play? Like we see this with universities too.
Is the question like credentialing, like the credentials on your resume, like what role does that play, and whether or not people want
more
to
than
invest in you?
More than credentials, I'd say shared context.
I would say, I mean, Andrew, feel free to jump into, but I would say that plays a fairly big role in getting like some angel investment to happen. Like there is definitely this wanting to support your friends phenomenon that happens, and generally I feel like it's very rare that I work with bad people. Like most of the people I end up working with are just great people, and I would want to support them no matter what. But I think there is definitely a difference between me wanting to invest like the smallest check possible in a startup versus like wanting to potentially do like a larger angel investment or something like that. And that truly depends a lot more on like proof points I've seen on how well they work and the reputation and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and for the record, neither of us are professional investors, so I mean, I think we can. I don't know how much we really can elaborate on this, but I think Steven's point's a good one, and I think the shared context that people you work with is always helpful and important. It's not just for fundraising, but for like who you might want to angel invest in, but just for recruiting, or even as simple as like someone that I've worked with and that I know is exceptional, or worked closely with, let's say, and they ask me for an introduction for like a job or some other purpose in my network. It's very easy for me to go to that person and be like, hey, you should really meet this person. They're exceptional. I worked really closely with them at this company under those contacts. Like that's very easy versus even someone at the same company, but maybe we didn't work very closely together. So most of my information was secondhand. Then it's like, I can still maybe make a recommendation, but it's slightly less strong. And then all the way to the point where like you didn't work with someone, it's like harder to make. But there's people I know that I might think are really, really sharp, but I've never actually worked with them. And so that I'm kind of going off an impression. And so if someone asks me like, hey, how amazing do you think this person would be as a founder? It's like, I think good, but that cosign would not be as strong as if I literally worked with them and seen what they were capable of on a day-to-day basis.
And I guess one last thing on that point too is the external perception of someone can be very, very different from what they're actually like to work with. Like there are unfortunately plenty of people in tech who have incredible personal brands, but have a terrible reputation. And those two things often don't line up.
100%. Right. So this is actually one of my biggest learnings from my, albeit short career to date, is that there's a very big delta. There's your personal brand and there's your reputation. They're not the same thing. Personal brand is much more of like an internet thing. Not just the internet, but generally like a brand is different than what people say about you when you're not in the room. Your personal brand is your Twitter followers, like how people like perceive you there, like maybe any PR you've had, stuff like that, like podcast appearances and how you can massage yourself to appear on a podcast. Not that we're doing that here today. Whereas like versus like what Steven says about me when I'm not in the room, or what Julian says about me when I'm not in the room. That is my actual reputation. And so when an investor texts Julian and is like, hey, you and Andrew work together, like, what do you think? Should I invest? That is my reputation. And so ideally for some people, they might have like 50 followers on Twitter, not to make this about followers, but just like not a lot of people necessarily know them on the internet. But if you talk to people they've worked with, they have a great reputation. And then there are people on the internet with a ton of followers and a ton of reputation and a ton of clout. And a lot of people don't respect them behind closed doors. And so I think ideally that delta is very small, but it often can exist. And some of the biggest names on tech Twitter, for instance, those people, some of them are great folks, but some of them have very poor reputations and are very underwhelming when you actually meet them.
Very well said.
Yeah, it's very well said. How do you know if your reputation is good with someone? I mean, how do you know your reputation is good with Julian? I'm Steven.
I think it's generally like a good way to tell is how how willing people are to do things like make intros for you. I think that's a really good one. Or just like, I mean, how authentically people seem to be excited for you and wanting to help you out in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think as an individual, you can never 100% know for sure, but I think you can have a pretty good feeling if you're self-aware. And like, I think indicators of like how much they're willing to support you and help you is definitely part of it. But if you're on the other side and you're trying to figure out, I think the better way to figure that out is how good is this person really? Like you do the back channeling. A big thing that I have learned in my career is just like, if you're not sure about someone, if you're thinking about hiring them, if you're thinking about fundraising from them, if you're thinking about doing some kind of partnership or deal with them, you can back channel like almost anyone. And it's very valuable to do that sometimes. Like sometimes you're thinking about like working with someone, and even just talking to one person that's worked closely with them in some capacity in the past, you can learn a lot about that person based on what you hear from them. So being able to find a way and talk to somebody that does actually know them and has seen them behind closed doors or off the very curated things you can see on the internet is probably the best way to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that even when we started working together, Andrew, I'm pretty sure we both backchanneled each other in some ways, even though like we both worked with each other and like knew each other well. It's just part of good due diligence, I feel like.
So originally I got started working on TaxWire first. Steven was still at On Deck. I was kind of like tinkering around and had like, and this is in the blog post you reached out to me about, but like I had stumbled into this set of problems around like taxes, compliance, and just a lot of things that go into running these companies that sell and operate like across multiple different states and countries. And so dealing with that, like I end up starting this company, and in that process though, I'm like, okay, I'm starting this, I'm working on this. I definitely wanted a co-founder, and when you're going through that process, it's like, so one thing I had done earlier in my career, actually, I think Julian is one of the first people that recommended this to me too, is write down all of the people that you want to maybe like that you have worked with in some capacity and like would want to work with again, and just keep track of them. And especially if like you're thinking about starting a company, like think of like who are the top people on that list. And I wrote down Steven's name at some point in 2021 as like would co-found a company with. Like I had a small list of people that I already knew I would, and he was at the top of that list. And so I banked that away. And then I kept Steven in the loop on what we were doing. I'm sure he probably knew lightly that I was like maybe thinking of recruiting him. I don't think I was that subtle about it. And so we had stayed in touch as I started working on this. And then, but I also like I talked to a few other people about potentially working together. It was never like the right fit. And then fortunately, the timing around Steven leaving On Deck coincided with like just where I was at with like looking for a co-founder, and we ended up like deciding to trial working together. And then after like maybe a month and a half of working together full time, we like formalized that partnership. But even in that process, to Steven's point earlier, one, like we had already worked together at a company, and so had like definite shared context. Two, we had a ton of friends that knew each other and had worked together in other capacities. Like one of our mutual friends used to work with Steven at a different startup. A bunch of my friends have went to school with Steven, and so we had that shared context. And so when we were both like thinking about doing this, he asked one of my best friends, like, what do you think about like, should I work with Andrew? What do you think about the thing he's working on? And like, I asked a couple people that have worked with Steven, like, what do you think about like me starting this with Steven? I can apply the same thing to recruiting. Like our first hires was someone Steven knew really well. And we still like, we had one of our investors talk to them. Like we still did some references. So I do think in a good scenario, these things are only going to build your conviction that this is the right person. And even if you learn some, and at worst case, like you might even just learn some things that are new about like, oh, I didn't know this angle on a person, and it doesn't mean you wouldn't work with them necessarily, but you'll learn new things that make you better at working with them, and hopefully increase your own conviction that this is the right thing. Or in the downside scenario, you might find out something new that makes you realize, okay, hey, maybe this is not the right person for me to work with in general, or in this specific context.
Yeah. Why did you work with Andrew?
Why did I work with Andrew? I've been interested in like, I would say startup product engineering stuff for quite a long time. Like I've been like starting, like doing side projects and starting like, companies and stuff like previously. Nothing to like write home about, but I've been like interested in this for literally like a decade or more. And I've gone back and forth on like what I actually would want in a co-founder, if I would want a co-founder at all. And I went through different phases. So I would say like the first, I don't know, like 5-ish years. I mean, I came out to SF and I was like very much drinking the Kool-Aid of like engineers are the shit. And like, I was thinking, okay, I would only want like a technical co-founder if I want a co-founder at all. But then I don't know, like once I feel like I actually started to get a lot of like real world experience of what like engineering leadership actually means, I realized, okay, that it's typically better to have, I think, people not step on your toes as much and have like one kind of like key decision maker for breaking ties, but also giving people a lot of autonomy to make decisions and things like that. And then I also just generally realized I just am not great at growth stuff. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, what are the fundamental skills that I would want to kind of like enrich myself with? And I think one of those, like probably the biggest one, is something around the customer facing, like sales, go to market, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, pretty much I went from like wanting a technical co-founder to like thinking I could do it all as a solo founder to thinking, wow, while I could do that, it just sounds like a much, much better time to have somebody who I can trust, like take care of a bunch of things that I'm just not an expert at. And so that's like where I was coming from outside of Andrew. And Andrew is like a very, very special person. But I mean, like, there's a lot of different things I liked about Andrew in particular. Like, I would say this all started though from like us having worked together at On Deck and knowing of like, just seeing how he worked at On Deck and his reputation from people who I like really, really respected from On Deck as well. So like, I think just going in, I already came in default with like a lot of trust and conviction. I don't know if you remember that, Andrew, but like, I think one of the first few days that we started working together, I was basically like just full steam ahead, like we're doing this, and past that.
Yeah.
Everything else was just a matter of like feeling like we're doing the due diligence and not jump into it too quickly. But yeah, I mean, like I could go on about things like reasons why I feel super lucky to work with Andrew every single day. But I think chief of those is we have a very strong, I would say like shared cultural backgrounds for one, which is actually more important than I think most people give credit for. So, I mean, like we both grew up in the Midwest. So I think we have just a particular way of communicating and like dealing with people and things like that, which honestly makes it very easy for us to work together. And yeah, I mean, Andrew is just a force of nature when it comes to like anything he's working on. I think like he says this pretty often about like just a lot of problems can just be solved with brute force. And I think he's like the perfect example of someone who can do that really, really well. So, I mean, every single thing that he's worked on, I feel like he has just put such high effort, structure, and diligence into that it's just produced incredible results like every single time.
That shared values thing is underrated. And I think our friend, his name's Hunter, knew that we both we're both pretty serious people. And we're both pretty, we're not, like some founders are very, very, I want to say like almost neurotic and much more like I don't know, like some founders, like, have no idea, like they start like working on the thing, but they're like idea machines and they could one day be working on a crypto company. And if like, and the next thing you might want to pivot that crypto company into AI or whatever it is. Where like Steven and I don't operate like that. And one thing he pointed out to me is that like one, our skill sets did on paper make a lot of sense. Two, it was a really good fit for the domain. But three, like we're both like I don't have to worry about Steven one day deciding, you know what, actually this entire time I've like really been wishing I would work on a crypto company. So that was never like a concern for me. And I think vice versa for him is, so knowing that we were both like pretty serious, pretty logical people, like we're not likely to just change our minds about what we want to work on the drop of a dime. Like everything we do is going to have like be rooted in a decent amount of like logic and intention. And I think that's actually like a non-trivial thing. People make the marriage analogy a lot, which is, I think, I see why they do it. But it is like one of like, I spend more time with Eva than I spend with my girlfriend. And he probably feels the same way. So I think it is like, and we're making like incredibly impactful decisions together on a regular basis. And so you really need to trust that person on many vectors, but especially the commitment level, because it definitely would like suck for either of us. If the other person like walked out today, like it would be incredibly impactful to the other person. So that's an incredible amount of trust and something that I feel incredibly grateful to work with Stephen.
One last thing too that was definitely a conviction building green flag for me was around Andrew's like quality of writing in particular. So, from On Deck, like I've only really worked at very remote first companies even before COVID. And so working at a company like that, you're forced to have a discipline in your writing and, take fewer meetings and make decisions more asynchronously. And Andrew really picked that up from On Deck too, in ways I could very clearly tell. And yeah, I don't know if I would have been able to like really work well with someone who was on the other end of that spectrum and like needed to like take meetings all the time and like didn't have the capacity to like kind of make asynchronous decisions and things like that. Like literally even when we were working together side by side, when it was just us two, we were like writing up Notion essays of like the things that we think that we should do, or like I like remember on my first day there, I like wrote out like a huge Slack thread of like all the different things that I think we should work on and like when and things like that. That was, I think I could go into a whole rant on this podcast too about writing and how to do it well and the importance of it. But that was just one green flag when working together.
Go back to Andrew's point. Andrew talked about the most important thing according to me is that one thing which I think I work with a lot of people who were initially serious about the project which we were working on, but then pivoted into like the same crypto, Web3, AI bullshit what I would like to do. So how do you identify? How do you know that Steven is serious about tech?
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. So I think so there's how you look at this generally, and then there's like Steven specifically. I think with Steven specifically, I think the On Deck context is actually important. But like On Deck is a company that like it did really well, and then it didn't. And it's very, especially in tech, like someone like Steven with his he's very modest, but someone with his skill set and his like engineering capabilities, like there is like a very big difference between like okay engineers and great engineers, and even more so ones that can actually like lead teams and command respect. And Steven is very like Steven could have left if he wanted to do many other things. And he was with On Deck like all the way through the ups and the downs. And he left the company in a really, really good, even when he was leaving, we started like working together. He was not fully out yet. And he just like, so I even saw like how he was like offboarding himself and making sure they were left in a really good spot. And that is, I think that like things like that are like really, really big green flags. Is you just see how does someone leave the last place that they were at? How long were they there? And I think it's easy to overrate that. Just like, were they there 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, like whatever. I think it's less about the period of time and more like how impactful were they for that period of time, and then how committed were they while they were there, and then how did they leave? And you can only really find that out by either having been there with them or talking to people that were there around that. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is just like knowing it's like someone's So I think for Steven, that was like a big thing for me because like both of his previous two companies, he was there through the highs and the lows. And even when he left on really good terms with all of those people, and he did it in a really good way. And so I think that's like the best way you can figure it out. If it's someone you don't know, then it's like you can kind of scan the resume of like how long were they at this thing versus that thing, like how much consistency has there been to their career. But yet again, like probably the best way to really figure that out is to like reference them with people that get to know them, and then two, reference them with people that have worked with them before to see like, was this person like really committed and all into the project, or were they like working on like 3 different things on the side and kind of distracted? So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think at the end of the day too, it's like when you do any job, especially doing a job at a startup, especially at a job where you have like a leadership position at a startup in some way, like your job, I think, becomes mostly about like keeping your people happy and motivated and things like that at the end of the day too. And so, I mean, all decisions I've made in the past with regards to like staying at a company through the highs and lows were, I would say, primarily like driven by that aspect of things, like a deep care for like everyone who I work with and everyone who I'm working for, like in terms of customers, right? So I mean, like if I were thinking through how would I judge that for someone I haven't worked with, that's like the framework I would use to think through that is like, how much is this person driven by and maybe like even loyal to their people in some way? And I think there's many ways that you can evaluate that. Even things like, I don't know, I mean, friendships and like relationships, and maybe things like even how they think about and support their family and things like that. There's lots of different ways you can tell that, I think.
If there was one commonality about all of these things is just what, because there's different motivations for this, but like what does someone do when it gets hard? Like that back to that Jensen poem quote. I think like when things, it's very easy to quit when it's very easy to stick with something when things are going well. It's hard to do so when things are going poorly, and almost any successful thing at some point will go through hard times. And so I think what someone does when it's not easy, both in their life, on a project, in a specific company, that will give you at least some kind of indication on like, is this person going to stick around or be able to stick with this thing when things are getting hard?
Yeah. And I guess just to add to that too, I think going through a hard experience one time like really makes the future times just so much easier. Like, I mean, I feel like you get this level of like you get this intuitive trust that even when stuff isn't going well, like this week, this month, like how bad could it like really be at the end of the day, and like how hard could this be at the end of the day? Like, I mean, most people who get to like work on a startup or a company are already in a pretty, I would say, nice and privileged position anyways, to take some type of risk. And like, even when stuff gets hard, like hopefully you're still working with really great people who you care about a lot, and like you're doing your crafts and things like that. And so I think like going through that type of hardship just even once puts things into great perspective for you. So yeah, I totally resonate with what Jensen Huang was saying.
How hard does it get? I mean, how do you know the hard situation you are in is not the hardest you'll ever be?
I think it's probably, I mean, it's I think not really something I can like rationalize easily. It's more like once you have a certain amount of scar tissue just from hard things happening before or bad things happening before, it just doesn't seem as bad, or like maybe you develop the skills to process it and handle it more effectively. And yeah, I mean, also just truth be told, like startups, like most companies, but especially startups, are just chaos most of the time. And that just becomes like the default, I think, of how it is. And your job is to create order from the chaos. So yeah, it's just a skill that I feel like gets better over time. What do you think, Andrew?
I think you don't know, really. I don't think you know if the thing you're going through is pretty hard. But I do think if you've been through hard things in your life, you at least like build some kind of a barometer for it. Like, and so you do build skills for going through it, whether the thing you're going through is like the hardest thing or not. And actually, kind of the nice thing is like you don't know. You don't know when you're going through it if it's the hardest thing. But if you've already been through hard things, you know you can handle another hard thing, and you have skills for going through that. And so I think it's more. It's more of those things. Like you pick up the skills, and it's building grit, it's building endurance, it's building mental toughness. And I think when you go through enough hard things, whether it's the hardest thing you've ever been through or not, you build the skills and the thick skin to be able to keep doing that.
Yeah, I think it's like it's very, very similar to things like exercise, honestly, and like weightlifting, strength training, things like that. Like you never, not that I'm an expert in that, obviously, but like it does become easier mentally. Like you almost have this separation of, I am like forcing myself to work hard right now, from this really feels hard, if that makes sense. Like it's you can almost set your brain into autopilot mode when dealing with a situation much more easily, because your brain's like chunked up that knowledge better about how to deal with hard situations, if that makes sense.
I mean, but talking about the hard thing, you know, what really makes building companies hard? Are you guys ready to face the hardship. I think suffering.
I guess like for us, I can't speak fully for Stephen, but I think, I think if you've worked I think this is mostly true for him too. Like all I have done my entire career is work on startups in some capacity. Like my career's been pretty short, but it's like I didn't like have a stable big corporate job that was different. So it's not like I came from that to this, and I'm now questioning if I can like do it. All I've known is this. So to some extent, because I've done that, like I at least know some of what to expect. I've worked at 2 different early stage startups. I started a small startup of my own when I was younger, and then I like was in venture for a bit, and then even beyond that, I think one thing you miss in like all of that is that I've been embedded in it, and I think this is true for Stephen too. Like all of our friends do this. We both like invested in some of our friends' companies, so like we see it from that angle. Like when you're in this scene, it takes over your life, and so you build up a lot of data and context on that. And so like we kind of know what we're signing up for, at least to some extent. I will say though, that doesn't prepare you for everything. TaxWire for me has been at least like one of the hardest things professionally, the hardest thing I've ever done. Probably not the hardest thing I've ever been through, but definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in a career context. But I think so. I think you have the institutional and lived experience when you've been in the scene that it's going to be hard, and so you know what to expect.
Yeah, but I guess I'm just trying to break down why it's hard exactly, because that was the original question, right?
That's right.
So I would say it's probably like it's like so you're trying to create like something from nothing, and against usually like there are usually like institutional outside forces which are incentivized that for you to not succeed as well, like be it competitors or even things like policy, I don't know, like whatever else, right? There's going to be plenty of people who like don't believe in you, things like that. So there's this kind of like constant pressure on you that's kind of like pushing you in the other direction. And so despite that, you still need to push forward anyways. And usually, especially if you do things like hire people or raise money, it's like you can't just like quit easily. Like you have no choice but to do it. So I think one thing that makes it hard is not only that it's genuinely like you're trying to like, you know, bend reality to your will, but also you're kind of like locked into it as well. But I think that teaches you resilience. But anyways, like the last thing I'll say too is there's this, I think literally maybe the most valuable career skill that I've tried to develop so far is just being able to figure it out no matter like what the thing is. Either by like, you know, leaning on other people or doing your own research, you know, things like that. So be it hiring people like or fundraising, or just doing even things like product planning or customer stuff. Like you have to do all these things. You have to suck at all these things. Like, you know, it is your job to make these things happen before you can hire someone to do it for you. So your day is going to be just filled with you doing things that you're usually, you know, sometimes maybe not the best at. So it's like, you know, despite the pressure from everyone else, despite the fact that like there's high consequences for quitting, and despite the fact that you're just doing stuff that you might not be great at all the time, you need to project like confidence and push forward and things like that. And that can definitely really get to people sometimes. But I found the best antidote to that is working with people you really, really like, working for people you really, really like, and choosing an area of work that you genuinely feel a lot of love for, because that makes the hours go by so easily, and it gives meaning to everything else.
Definitely who you work with makes a big impact on that. What you work on also, I think the customers or like to the extent you're serving customers, or if you're in business, you probably are, and that you care about them, and you care, that I think that is actually an underrated motivator. And then I think in terms of like a plus one on like why it's hard, startups are uncertainty maxing. Like we're maxing out on uncertainty all the time. Like the outcomes are deeply, deeply uncertain. And even just when you start, like you don't even know, like when you like start down this path, if you're onto something, you could spend 2 months like kind of like trying to validate if like you should start this company or build this product. and find out you were wrong and have to start over. You could work on it for 2-3 years, hire people, raise money, and fail. These are the odds and the things you're facing, and you're like dealing with that every single day and having to make decisions through it and having to work through it. And so it is very, very challenging to manage your own emotions through that process, like day in, day out, because you have to show up consistently and do the work, and you have to at least appear somewhat confident and like you have your shit together to the external world. Like for both for your team, but also like for customers, fundraising, recruiting, like whatever it is, like you can't just decide this is too much for me and tap out, or you can, but then that is like very, very bad for both yourself and the company.
Do you think you guys, where do you think you guys are getting somewhere? So good, Andrew.
Yeah. Wait, no clue. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I think the nice thing about where we're at is like we're still like, we're, for context, anyone listening here, if you like don't know anything about us, like we've been at this. I've been at this for about a year. Steven's been at this for close to that. And we've and then like since then, like when I got started into this, it was like I wasn't even sure it was going to become a company. Like not really. It was like a problem slash set of problems I'd faced that like led into to starting this company. And then even then, like you're like, I spent months on it before I was like probably at least a couple months on it before I was pretty damn sure I was gonna like start this thing. I think it was like a couple months before I fully committed to it. And then there were like many more months of being like, you're like, where you like just look up and you have nothing really to show for all the work you're doing. And so I think so I actually would say, like, if you asked me this like late last summer, or maybe like mid last summer, I was like confident we were onto something, but felt like there was not as much to show for that as I wanted there to be. But I stuck with it. And I think now, like I look at it, like Steven joining was like one of the best things that happened to this company, because it had no chance of success without someone like him. And then like, I think we just had honestly a lot of momentum since then, both with customers, with our product, with fundraising, etc. So I'd say like we all in all, like things are really good. We've still not like publicly launched what we're doing at TaxWire yet, but it went from literally being like a problem I felt, then like an idea about how to solve it, and then a bunch of like research with customers, to being like actual customers that like pay us money, to like quickly, like we are building a product that is like becoming more and more real every single day. Getting to work with someone like Steven, working with investors I really, really respect, who like backed what it is we're trying to achieve. And like we recruited a team that we're both like really, really stoked to work with. So I think all of those things are amazing, and we have a lot of momentum relative, but at the same time, we have like, so the momentum's good, the trajectory's good, but there's also like what it is, all the odds we're still facing, and everything we still have left to achieve. So it's like, compared to that, like we have a lot of work to do, and a lot to keep going. So but all today, like you got to keep it going, because if you stop it doesn't matter. So
I mean, one thing that Andrew and I like talking about a lot as well is how building and growing a company is just, it's all about just consistently building your authentic conviction that the company will succeed, hopefully in like a bigger and bigger way as time goes on. So yeah, I mean, it's just like that's been like one of the most useful, productive mindsets I've found so far. Like at every single stage of the company, like maybe every 3 months or so, it just feels like, the things that felt out of reach before are now possible, and the things that felt possible before are now like default going to happen, if that makes sense. And that feeling is just so rewarding. Like I would almost say like that's maybe that's like maybe one of the most important values or mindsets we have when running this company, is just trying to be real with ourselves about like where are we at, and like what's our actual authentic confidence level on things working out, and like what can we do to basically maximize that or optimize that.
Yeah, and actually to piggyback off that, because I think that's such a great point. And for the record, this progressively building conviction framework, it is totally Steven's. He gets all the credit for that. I picked that up from him. But I think what as I've reflected on that, there's just like so many things. Like when we raised money, hopefully none of our investors are listening to this, but if you are, hi. I'm like, there were definitely like moments where I was like, I'm pretty sure we can pull off this product we want to build and are started to build. But I was like not 100% sure that we could truly deliver. And now where we're at with like everything we've done so far and the team we've recruited, I wrote in a recent investor update that I'm 100% confident that like we will be able to build the product we set out to build. And to like, when I go to bed at night, I'm not stressing about that. And one thing I think both Steven and I picked up from the startups that we've been at is I think we've, at least I feel that we have both been at companies where and I think this is the thing in startups, unfortunately, is that it's really easy to bullshit yourself. But the downside of that is that sometimes it's like shit is not working and you should not lie to yourself about that. And so if you're lying to yourself, you're living in a delusion when you should just be working on like, how do I fix the thing that is wrong, or focus on what's on getting us to a place where things are working. And so I think having that like honest dialogue, like forcing yourself to that bar of like, you should have conviction on what it is you're doing and selling to your team, to the market, and everyone else. It is really important because one is you'll operate better because the actual conviction is there. But two, when things are not working, you fix it faster because you can't, like, if you have a culture where you're literally like refusing to bullshit yourself, there's nowhere to hide, because like, it's just like, we're going to get on all hands with our team, like right after this. And, we're going to talk about something that's like, a very like, it's like a lot of things going well for us, but there's like things that like we are worried about and stressed about, and we're going to like talk about one of those things, maybe a couple of those things. And I think it's important to have that, like, we're not going to bullshit ourselves, and we're going to be honest about like, these are the things we have conviction on and we've got it. And these are the things we're worried about. And that we just like, you could hide from it. You could try to like act like it's not a thing, or you could just face reality. And I think if you force yourself to progressively build that conviction, I think it's just a better framework for searching for truth. And fundamentally, like, every new company is a process of, it's an idea, it's a hypothesis, and you're progressively seeking truth about like, is that right? And and what part of it is right? And if something of it's wrong, like, can you adjust that thing to be closer to the truth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like you're a like a scientist doing experiments on the market itself, and your experiment is like a product launch or a new feature or something like that, right? Yeah, it's like you're designing an instrument to like test the science of the market, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah. So, there are a lot of things there, but I just put not this part. First, I want to address the elephant in the room. What are you guys building?
Yeah, so I can at least like start on this one. So I'll admit that we're a bit intentionally vague about this still on the internet, at least. But we'll be progressively more public about this over the months ahead. But we're working on something in the tax and compliance space, we'll call it. And really, if I like actually speak about it, like I'll talk about like how I got into this. Like, again, like my background, startups, fintech, like operating at companies. The most recent company I wasn't even working there full time, but a mutual friends of ours company I took over as like a part-time head of finance just to help out. And this company had a problem that also other companies, both Steven and I have been at, including OnDeck, have had, and that a lot of modern companies have, where when things work, they can work well and they can work really quickly. And so this specific company had grown from operating it's like a marketplace that sells to schools. Like it's almost like Uber Eats for school lunch here in the US. And they started growing really, really quickly. So from 1 state to 20 states and like 100 schools. And it was incredible growth. But my friend asked me to come help them out with some of their like finance problems, just part-time. And there were like a bunch of them. And the actual downside, and this is a thing that you face across like all of like a lot of modern companies, is because we had grown so fast, we went from just like, we're in like this 1 state where there's like, we don't have to worry about much more than like making sure we're filing our taxes and operating correctly in the state of Michigan, to all of a sudden we're everywhere. And I've got like the state of Georgia, where no one on our team has ever set foot in Georgia before, but Georgia is sending us like mail saying, hey, you should be paying us sales tax. Or like we registered for some business license in California. Now California wants to know why we've not like filed for withholding tax. It's just the thing I'm getting at is that in the modern world, the internet and software completely obliterated borders. There are no borders now. We sell things everywhere. We can, like, if you're a software company and you make a widget, you use ChatGPT right now and you spin up like, make me an application that does X, and then you set up a Stripe payment link for it. Like within like 10 minutes, we could have a product that someone could theoretically pay for, and we could sell that thing anywhere in the world. Like someone in China, Africa, Brazil, Steve and I are sitting in me, Ohio right now, him New York, someone in Texas could go buy that thing. And you just literally created it in minutes. Even something like e-commerce where it touches the physical world, because there are now distribution centers that almost anybody, you can set up like e-commerce store on Shopify or Squarespace, or like name one of a dozen options. You just have these tiny companies that sprout out of like nothing. And now they hire employees and operate physically and sell digitally all over the world. On the flip side of this, we have the old world of just like state, local, and just individual governments. Like every country around the world has their own regulations. But even just to take the United States as a microcosm, there is every single state in this country has its own set of laws and regulations. So if you were to go expand like in the case of this company, Quora, they were to go into a new state, that means they have to, if they were going to comply with all the laws, there's local like business licenses that you might need to have to like sell food and to deliver food in like some random county in Texas that is specific to that county in Texas that you have to like file for this registration. It's a whole piece of paperwork on a very outdated website. You have to, if you hire an employee there, you have to pay the state of Texas like withholding tax on all of your employees and register for payroll tax. If you're selling products there, you have to register for and calculate and file sales tax. And so there's all these things in all these different jurisdictions. There's tens of thousands of individual jurisdictions in the United States alone, and they all regulate things differently. If you expand that around the world, it's like a very similar thing. Each country, like if you sell into Europe, every country has different laws and regulations around. Because of that, there's just these like very fundamentally different systems. The internet knows no borders, but state, local, and just individual governments around the world very much know borders, and they very much they have borders, they have regulations unique to these borders, and it's very hard to combine those two systems, because the only companies in the old world that were dealing with this were like huge multinational corporations where they could literally have entire teams in-house to manage this, plus pay like ancient, big, huge accounting firms tons of money to go navigate all of this complexity for them. But a small business, or even a company with like a few hundred employees and $20 million in revenue, they do not have the capacity to hire like a massive accounting firm to go do this for them around the world. So there's a fundamental disconnect, and that's not going away. And what we are doing at TaxWire is working on software products to essentially abstraction layers on top of all of these local regulations and jurisdictions and laws to make it very, very easy for companies that sell, hire, and operate around the US and around the globe to do that compliantly. Because states and countries, they don't have malice towards business. There's a reason why these laws exist. But these companies also, like, they need to grow, and it's like still far too difficult for folks like myself included back in this example where I dealt with a lot of these problems. It's way too difficult to comply. And so ideally we want to build software that just makes it very simple. You plug into it and it automates away all the complexity, and you can operate your business effectively without worrying about all of these things. It like essentially removes this burden on doing business, while also like letting companies do that compliantly, and therefore the states and these countries around the world are also. So without getting too specific about what we're doing, as we'll share more about it.
I'm just very lucky to have Andrew doing all the pitches because he's really good at it. I'll sit behind and do some of the engineering.
But like, what is that? I don't get the point of it. Why is it?
So I think I'm assuming you're referring to, so like one of the things we talked about in the blog post I wrote that triggered this specific conversation is sales tax is also similar to payroll tax in some semblance. Where, like, people think when they think taxes, they kind of just think of the IRS, which is this one. It is very complicated, but it's one institutional body that regulates income tax across the U.S. However, or federal income tax at least. However, for sales tax, which is if you're listening globally, it's our version of VAT or GST, where there's it's all about the transaction. So if I buy a physical product at a grocery store, or if I buy a piece of software, or I'm a business, I buy some components that is or some supply that I need to run my business. You never really thought about it. Most of them spend as a consumer just going about your life. Like you see that something you just bought at a coffee shop costs like 50 cents more than you thought it should. Or worse yet, if you buy software as we have for our company in New York State where they tax software, it's you see a pretty hefty bill sometimes on additionally on top of what you're paying for. But beyond that, it's like we shrug and we pay. It's quite complicated because there's all these different jurisdictions that have different tax rates, different laws on like what is and isn't taxable. Like a really famous one in New York City is that bagels. If you buy a bagel and they have like not prepared it, they've not put butter, cream cheese, anything on it like that, it's not taxed. And if that same bagel, someone spread cream cheese on it with a knife, is now taxed. And so there's like that kind of very complicated regulation on it. And so that's sales tax specifically, but you can apply that same set of problems across like payroll that you have to deal with, like things like in sales tax or payroll, like at what point do I have to register with the state for some kind of taxes that I have to start like paying them and filing to them? And there's actually filing the return. So it's multiple levels, but most of it boils down to like companies having to understand like what it is that I should be doing, which there's a very low amount of awareness for. Second, then if I have to do something about it, there's like some form of registration or filing process of like getting set up with the states in the first place. Then there's like possibly rate calculations if you're doing some kind of transaction for payroll or for sales tax. And then there's like actually filing returns themselves. And so it's just and you're dealing with very old systems from these states. So
but the reason why I targeted sales tax specifically because all over the world, like payroll and all these payroll and the license and all these, they're very different all over the world. The sales taxes are like cut out of context. It shares context all over the world in some form or some way or like can relate to. For example, in India we have like goods and services tax, GST, like you talk about too. But I mean, a lot of people crib about paying sales tax and all these. I'll leave out taxes, the sales tax specifically. A lot of companies find workarounds to a lot of these. So building a solution for things that people can find workarounds to, how do you deal?
Yeah, you're 100% right. It definitely does make it a lot harder because not only do you have to basically deal with all the complexity of like local and state compliance, but you also have to deal with all the complexity of like company hacks, if that makes sense, and company messiness, which is definitely a beast. And I mean, so far, I think our thinking on this is like right now, while we're still at like a smaller scale, like let's provide the absolute best experience we can via any means necessary, and then figure out how to scale like what works, basically. Yeah, so I think we're like a very kind of like customer experience forward company right now, even though like we're spending almost all of our time doing like product building and like sales and distribution and customer work and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say like that's definitely a massive challenge that like people don't really talk about that much.
You guys like have come this far in the building journey, like from having no conviction now to now Andrew explaining everything. Like, he has done hundreds of things, I'm sure he has. So how did you really like build the conviction for this? I mean,
I think it was, again, to the earlier point, it was like a very much a progressive process. But a lot of it was just like I felt this problem myself. So I had a pretty opinionated stance of like the kinds of things I was dealing with, and it was pretty frustrated with that. And then I think so there was some conviction around that, and then I spent honestly like a lot of time with customers. So I would encourage anybody that's like thinking about starting something to do it, just like go talk to a lot of customers, and you will learn more from that than doing almost anything else. And then also too at this point, like we've been we have actual customers now. Like I don't have to question like, will people pay us money for this? Like people do. We have like a product. It's a progressive thing over time where your conviction goes up.
Yeah, I think something I would want to tell my past self too is like I think especially when you're like, let's say like raising a pre-seed, there's this expectation that you have to feel like you're bulletproof in your idea, and like, you have to completely project absolute confidence. And so I think people don't often talk about how like the reality is you are probably, hopefully, at the lowest stage of confidence you will be for the rest of the company's life cycle in terms of like how confident you are about the company's success. So, I mean, for me, what I knew I was ready was I have absolute confidence in us as people. And I have also a ton of confidence in, let's say, the space we're working in. And that I think was enough to get started. After that, though, I would say that other people coming in and like, let's say, investing in us, believing in us, be it customers or investors or employees or like whatever else, that really does make a big difference too. And like that, that's something I think that like founders want to pretend doesn't happen, because you want to have this image that you're just this absolutely confident beast all the time. But the reality is like you will get more confident about it as time goes on.
People correlate their personal identity with the company's identity, so that if the company is doing well, then they are doing well, or vice versa. I think we'll take a hard stop there. We had it for like 1.5 hours and being incredible. I'm so glad we did this. One thing that I'd like to end with, one question which I like to end with. I've been into startups, VCs, and all these things since I was like 11. What do you think is one fact that would blow 11-year-old?
That's a hard question.
I mean, one thing that I like, especially when I was like younger in tech and like, younger, trying to get into founder stuff, there's like this huge pressure that if you don't like make some big success by the time you're like 25 or 27 or something, that like you're never going to make it. That is factually incorrect. And I think people often underappreciate how much time there is in your life to basically grow and play the long game. I think something like the average age of, don't quote me on this, but I heard that the average age of like a unicorn founder is somewhere in like late 30s, not in like mid 20s. Yeah, I think that's one fact that blew my mind the most and like really helped me a lot, is just understanding like you have time and space to play the long game and like be patient with it, and like life has a lot of good things in store.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say on that is for me, I think I think role models are super important, and I just didn't have a lot of role models that were even doing anything remotely like this where I grew up. And so when I did get into this space, it was very I just thought everyone was better than me. I didn't think I was good enough, and I still struggle with this in some ways, but far less than I did. And I think the big thing is that when you get around these people that especially if you're on the internet and looking at them and you're like, oh, I can never do that. And then you see them and you just realize they're humans too. They're not necessarily any better than you. And so you can do, like, the people you admire, they're very human. And so that like should motivate you that like you can do whatever it is you set your mind to do. They're like, people just like aren't inherently better than you. And just the last thing here is Steve and I have to jump is just thank you for having us on Vic. And it's been fun to get to know you a little bit here today, and we really love what you're doing with this podcast, trying to help other people like yourself that want to all around the world that are interested in starting things. And
yeah, even last to it, not.
Oh, likewise, like this, I had so much fun doing this, and I don't know, I feel very energized coming out of this, even though today I was feeling kind of tired. So that's always a good sign that the conversation was giving a lot of life energy. So yeah, I mean, anyone who's listening to this too, feel free to like DM me on Twitter or whatever else if you have any questions or want to dive into any more of these things that we talked about. So yeah, I mean, this was great. Thank you so much.